Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you and welcome to Indonesia Pavilion. I'm so happy to see some familiar faces and meeting some new friends to talk about how to build a sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation. But before we go into that, I would like to ask the audience a question, just a simple one. What is the triple planetary crisis? And if you are able to answer that, I have a special tumbler to give you. And if you don't mind, Mbak Nia, it's right next to you. Can you show to the audience what it looks like? So this is the tumbler. If you could answer, this is for our... Okay, it's not from our pavilion. This specific question is only for our international audience. I'm not trying to be discriminating, but I really need to test them out, okay? Okay, so one, what is the first one, sir? Pollution. Your answer is pollution. Okay, one of our staff will give it to you. No, you only get one, sorry. If you want to answer it all, but you still, we give the opportunity to other audience. Anybody? Yes, you first? Biodiversity loss? Is it right? I don't know the answer. I have to check with them. Yes, okay. What's the last one? Climate change. All correct? Okay, 1, 2, 3. One of our staff will approach you and will give it to you. Thank you very much. So, with that, thank you. Planetary crisis consists of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And of course, the over-exploitation of natural resources, they're all risk and threat to our mega biodiversity. So the effective conservation program is inevitable, but that long-term biodiversity conservation program requires sustainable and adequate of financing. Before we get deeper into that, allow me to invite our keynote speaker. He's the Assistant Director for Electricity and Biology Development from the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, Republic of Indonesia. Please welcome Bapak Sunandar.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Before we begin, I would like to extend our sincere apologies as Mr. Deputy is unable to join us today due to unforeseen circumstances. With his kind permission, I am Sunandar, Assistant Deputy for Electricity and Geology Development, will deliver his keynote speech on his behalf. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to extend our warmest welcome to all speakers. Mr. Ruanda Agung Sugardiman, Indonesia Expert Advisory Council for Polu Netting 2030, Mr. Nur Aliwadoyo, Senior Advisor to the Minister for Biodiversity and Socio-Cultural Resources Conservation, Ministry of Environment, Mrs. Endah Tri Kurniawaty, Director of Fundraising and Development, BPDLH, Ms. Valerie Hinki, World Bank Global Director for Climate, Mr. Danjarin, Executive Director Forest and Climate Change Wildlife Conservation Society. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to Indonesia Pavilion COP30 Belém, Brazil. It is an honor to be here today at this dialogue session on sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation, hosted by the Indonesia Pavilion at COP30. Allow me to extend my appreciation to the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Forestry, the Environmental Fund Management, BPDLH, and our partners from the Wildlife Conservation Society for convening this important discussion. Standing here in Belém, surrounded by the world's largest tropical forest, remind us that biodiversity is not only a matter of ecological integrity, it is a foundation for our economies, our food security, and our collective resilience against climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, we all recognize that biodiversity loss is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. According to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, around 1 million species are now at risk of extinction. This is not just a tragedy for nature, it is a systemic risk for humanity. Yet, despite the urgency, the global biodiversity finance gap remains enormous. Bridging this gap requires not only more funding but also smarter, more sustainable financial mechanisms that align conservation with development and economic transformation. Indonesia, as one of the world's megadiverse countries, has made the biodiversity a central pillar of its sustainable development strategy. But we also understand that protecting biodiversity cannot rely solely on public budgets. We need to innovate to create financial ecosystem that can sustain conservation over generations. Distinguished participants, sustainable financing for biodiversity is not the responsibility of one ministry, one sector, or one institution. It demands multi-stakeholder collaboration across government agencies, private enterprises, civil society, indigenous communities, and development partners. Indonesia's approach is rooted in the belief that biodiversity conservation and economic development are not opposing forces, but mutually reinforcing goals. To realize this, we are pursuing three key pathways of collaboration. First, integrating biodiversity into national planning and local development. Second, empowering communities and indigenous people as custodians of biodiversity. Third, strengthening global partnership for biodiversity finance. As we gather under the banner of the UNFCCC, it is crucial to emphasize that climate and biodiversity are two sides of the same coin. Nature-based collaboration, such as forest conservation, mangrove restoration, and sustainable land management deliver co-benefits for both climate mitigation and biodiversity protection. However, global financing architecture still often spares climate and biodiversity funding streams. This fragmentation must change. Indonesia is advocating for integrated financing frameworks that bridge these agendas. Through instruments like the BPDLH, we seek to blend carbon finance with biodiversity objectives, ensuring that mitigation projects are also enhance ecosystem integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, as Indonesia moves forward toward a green and resilient economy, we are committed to advancing sustainable financing as the backbone of biodiversity conservation. Through the leadership of BPDLH and the support of our ministries, partners, and international community, we envision a financial ecosystem where protecting nature is not a cost, but an investment in our collective future. Let us work together, governments, financial institutions, private sector, and civil society to create a new global compact for nature finance where biodiversity thrives, economies prosper, and communities flourish. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Sunandar, for the keynote. Okay, let's explore what are the sustainable. Sorry, again, I have to reiterate, it's not from our pavilion, like they said, okay? We'll check into that. Okay, so we're going to explore what are the sustainable financing strategies, the instruments, the financial instruments to ensure the long-term biodiversity conservation, and what are the key factors to successfully implement the sustainable funding for the conservation. In order to do that, to lead the discussion, please welcome the Policy Advocacy Manager from Climate Reality Project Indonesia, Ari Adi Pratomo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, and delegates. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to the Indonesian Pavilion here at COP30 in Belém, Brazil. Give a round of applause to all of us. My name is Ari Wijanoko Adipratomo, and I'm from the Climate Reality Project Indonesia. And it is an honor to moderate these sessions organized by the Indonesian Environmental Fund, or BPDLH. And today, our dialogue will be on sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation. Indonesia is one of the world's mega biodiversity countries. Our forests, mangroves, corals are home to countless species that provide ecosystem services vital to life. Yet, these natural habitat loss, climate change, and offshore exploitations are threatening our very livelihood. Sustainable financing is therefore not a choice. It is a necessity. Today, we will explore creative mechanisms to bridge the biodiversity financing gap through public, private, and also innovative partnership, and ensure that nature continues to be the foundations of our resilience. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speakers and distinguished panelists to the stage. Please, Bapak and Ibu, come forward. Starting from, I would like to invite first Bapak Nur Adiwardoyo, Senior Advisor to the Minister for Biodiversity and Socio-Cultural Resource Conservation. Over here, Bapak, silakan. Now, I would like to invite, secondly, Dr. Wanda Agung Sugardiman, Expert Advisory Council for Follow Net Sing. Bapak Wanda, please. Third, I would like to invite Ms. Endah Tri Kurniawaty, Director of Fundraising and Development from BPDLH, or Indonesian Environment Fund. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Dan Zarin, Executive Director for Forest and Climate Change, Wildlife Conservation Society. And last but not the least, I would like to invite Ms. Valerie Hickey, Global Director for Climate from the World Bank. Over to you, Ibu. Thank you, Bapak and Ibu, and welcome to the discussions at Indonesia Pavilion. I'll take my seat. Okay, this will be very interesting sessions with all the panelists here. But please allow me to first go into the first discussions. Let me start with Bapak Nur Adiwardoyo, the Senior Advisor to the Minister for Biodiversity and Socio-Cultural Resources Conservation from the Ministry of Environment. Pak Nur, as the ministry serves as Indonesia's focal point for the conventions of biological diversity, Pak, could you share the national priority programs for biodiversity conservation and how this align with the Global Biodiversity Network and Indonesia's NDC's target? Over to you, Pak.
Thank you. Can I use the slides or can I? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you have the slides ready? Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, good day. Thank you for inviting us to join this session. And I would like to provide you a brief overview of the policy on biodiversity in Indonesia and our interest now in the biodiversity credits. Yeah? Okay, the slides, please. Yes, vast natural capital of Indonesia, no need for detailed information, you got it. Indonesia is rich in the natural capital, yeah? Okay, next, and say hi to the freshwater dolphin from Hakam River, yes? Okay, next. So, that we have identified the richness of biodiversity in Indonesia, and we have captured it in the Indonesia Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan for year 2025-2045. So this IPSAP is the base of our management of biodiversity in Indonesia. Yeah, next. Okay, say hi to the orangutans. Yeah, and next. So, this is the summary of the richness of biodiversity in Indonesia. You can read, you can explore the figures later because we will distribute these materials to you. Yeah, I don't have time to explain each of these. Yeah, please enjoy. And next. So with this reach of the biodiversity, yeah, so we have the integrative plan, strategy and plan, yeah, for managing biodiversity in Indonesia. That includes also in the financing biodiversity management in Indonesia. Yeah. And next is we are now interested in developing the policy and framework for biodiversity credits in Indonesia and also the innovative finance. Yeah. And so see that we are having dialogue, we are having communications with all the business and with the communities, yeah, and they are all interested in developing biodiversity credits in Indonesia. And so here we are, the Ministry of Environment is ready to host this dialogue in Indonesia to develop Indonesia biodiversity credit scheme. Yeah. Okay. Next. So we have this potential of the biodiversity credits in Indonesia. How that we can develop this? So we have the legal basis, yeah, for developing this scheme in Indonesia, and we have also our experience in developing carbon credits governance and carbon credits markets in Indonesia. So we will use this as our investment and develop the biodiversity evaluation framework. And we have some projects on the ground that already capture that biodiversity and carbon can work hand in hand on the field, yeah, on the ground through some projects. So we have gained this understanding, we have gained this knowledge, and how that we can start these biodiversity credits in Indonesia. Next. So we also recognize that now we have some innovative financing instruments, yes, and we have this dialogue and we have these technical groups, yeah, to discuss this with the Bappenas, the National Planning Agency, and with the Ministry of Finance, with the Ministry of Forestry, and etc. So we have started this process of discussion, how that we can develop a financing scheme for biodiversity. We have the basis, but now we need to open a window for biodiversity financing in Indonesia. Okay, next. So, what are those challenges? Number one is on the standards. In the standards, in the methodology, yeah, and so we will develop this together with a group of governments and partner institutions, yeah, how that we can develop these methodologies fast, yeah, and it's very important to work on these methodologies. And also, we need to develop these valuation and monitoring instruments, yeah, because this is not carbon, yeah, this is biodiversity with so many aspects of biodiversity. So we need to work on this side, the methodology, valuation, and monitoring. Next. Next slide. And we need also to have the policy work and institutional coordination. We have the Ministry of Environment, we have the Ministry of Forestry, we have the Ministry of Marine and Fisheries Affairs, and we have many institutions working on the ground. Yeah? So we need to have a good coordination, and as a national teamwork we will develop. So we hope that we can work together, we can collaborate, not fighting each other, please don't. because that we need to work as a good team together. And also on the market readiness and investor confidence, yes, we have seen some interest from our international partners in the biodiversity credits in Indonesia. We need more of communication. We need more of doing exercise of what works and what does not work. But we aim at high integrity biodiversity credits. And so now the Ministry of Environment is working with the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits led by UK and France. Yeah. Now we will join this collaboration among lead governments to work on the principles, yeah, and guidance towards high integrity biodiversity credits. Government is very important to provide this policy and guidance so that we can develop these high integrity biodiversity credits from the ground up, and we can have all the stakeholders to work with us together. Yeah. Next. Okay, we have some of these opportunities, but we see that from Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, yes, we are working with that, and also we based our work with the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, yeah, and we also have joined the Task Force of Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So we have started this engagement. Yeah, next. Okay. Next. Technology data innovation, we will do that. Next. And this is way forward to us. National Biodiversity Credit Framework, Biodiversity Finance Task Force, and next. Strengthen capacity and market ecosystem, promote blended and innovative financing, and ensure integrity, equity, and community benefits. So these are the foundation of our biodiversity credits development. And so next is let us work with our colleagues, yeah, to start development of these policy and instruments in Indonesia. I hope that we can make it. Yeah, and so next time we will present you with the progress of our policy development. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Manor. Thank you so much, Partner, for highlighting the governance and also financing aspect and dimensions of the biodiversity conservations. Now, I would like to turn the next opportunity to Dr. Wanda Agung Sugardiman, member of Indonesia Expert Advisory Council for the Follow Net Sing 2030. Pak Wanda, yes, monggo Pak, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The audience is a good opportunity to me to share the Ministry of Forestry of Indonesia, how the progress of our target of NDC can be achieved. As you know, from the NDC target, we have 5 sectors to be reduced the emission. First from the energy, the second from industry, third from the waste, the fourth from the agriculture, and the biggest one, the reducing from the forestry and other land uses. This is Indonesia mitigation action, how to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Next. The target of 2030 of Indonesia NDC is we have become net sink. What does this net sink mean? It's the absorption of forestry is bigger than the emission from the forest and other land uses. This is our target in 2030. The number is minus 140 million CO2 equivalent. Next. To achieve our target, we have a operational plan. The detailed activity, how we can reduce our emission from the forestry and other land uses. You can see this the left-hand side is the activity, the biggest activity in the forestry, and if I can make a simplify, there are three mitigation action. First, action to reduce emission. The most big activity is we reduce the forest fire and deforestation, of course. And the second mitigation action is to maintain carbon stock. Yes, we can put our effort to maintain our forest that is still in the field. And the biggest activity is mitigation action for enhanced stock carbon. So if three mitigation action in this, we can relate it with the REDD plus the next. You can see from here how related our follow target with the program of REDD plus. So you know, very familiar with the REDD plus. So you can see from the third point is the role of conservation. So how biodiversity can be supported by standing stock or forest in Indonesia. That's why how important is follow for the biodiversity conservation. That's my point. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Rwanda. Give a round of applause to Pak Rwanda. Thank you, Pak, for very insightful the policy design connection between the climate and also biodiversity. Now, I would like to also move to the next panelist, Ms. Endah Tri Kurniawaty, Director of Fundraising and Development at the Indonesia Environmental Fund, or BPDLH. Ibu Nia, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Ari. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, because Pak Rwanda and Pak Adi stay here, so I also. Yeah, thank you, Pak Adi and Pak Rwanda for the presentation. So referring to the presentation from Pak Adi and Pak Rwanda, we know that the issue of biodiversity is cross-cutting issue. And in Indonesia architecture, the biodiversity is under authority of the Ministry of Environment and also Ministry of Forestry and also Ministry of Agriculture and Marine and Fisheries. And when we talk about the IPRs, intellectual property right, biosafety, and also maybe commercialization, so it will involve other ministries like Ministry of Trading and also Ministry of Law and also other ministry. So I think because it is cost-cutting and maybe Bu Valerie referring to our discussion yesterday in Germany Pavilion that there will be a shifting landscape of climate finance, how each country has to set up better sustainable financing for climate change. So I think it is important as well for Indonesia to set up sustainable financing for biodiversity right now. And then also maybe referring to Pak Adi presentation, then one of the way forward of the government Indonesia to set up blended finance or innovative financing. So I think this is one of the option how the government will have like sustainable financing. Next, please. For the PPT. And next, please. And then right now, under Minister of Forestry, we already launched the Indonesian Biodiversity Fund. The fund is supported by WCS, and then the objective of the fund is to provide initial fund to establish the operationalization of innovative financing for the biodiversity conservation that are accountable, functional, and transparent. But later, maybe the platform of biodiversity fund is not only for the forestry. There are another potential program for the biodiversity fund covering marine and fisheries and also maybe important area with high level of high value of the biodiversity. And then next, please. And Pak Rwanda mentioned that right now the Indonesian Environment Fund as a financial national financial mechanism already manage some biodiversity fund, such as like fund coming from the collaboration from Indonesia and Norwegia under the RBC Volu, as Parwanda mentioned. And then we also got support from the result-based payment. It's also intended for the biodiversity. And then how then we can develop a kind of one platform for biodiversity finance to have a sustainable finance for biodiversity later on. And then maybe in our design, how to have like sustainable financing. We do hope maybe in the future we will have like endowment fund, either endowment fund or maybe innovative financing like fund facility for biodiversity. So at this point, IF will collaborate with the manager investment to issue like financial structure, maybe namely collective investment undertaking, and then with underlying project of biodiversity conservation. So at this point, when we generate a fund from the issuing of the infrastructure fund or investment, collective investment undertaking, the fund will be returned back to the biodiversity conservation using the grant scheme or maybe the revolving fund at this point. So we do hope this is a kind of the scheme can continue generate fund from the investor. But maybe by set up this collective investment undertaking, because this is kind of a new product in Indonesia, there are opportunities and of course there are many challenges for Indonesia to set up this kind of the product. Next please. So maybe for the challenges, of course, we have to, how to attract the investor, we have to make sure that the underlying project is there. So we have to identify the biodiversity conservation with low risk, and then we have to valuing the underlying project of biodiversity conservation with appropriate monetization, because this is it is not easy to monetize the biodiversity value. And then the next is no investment instrument in Indonesia that really fit to the scheme right now. As I mentioned, this is like a new scheme for the natural base, because for the infrastructure we already have like infrastructure fund for the highway development in Indonesia. And also I think we still need to develop legal basis and its operational instrument for collective investment undertaking. And the last one, because this is new structure, so we have developed understanding among stakeholders how the scheme can be reach the market at the end. And then of course a lot of opportunity, because as you see that the government have a lot of commitment, support how we can develop the sustainable financing through the blended finance. And also, as we know that Indonesia is one biodiversity, so there are a lot of underlying project on biodiversity conservation available in Indonesia. So we also have a lot of opportunity how to attract the investor later on by referring to the underlying project on biodiversity conservation. I think that's all from our side. Thank you. Back to the Mas Ari.
Thank you, Ibu Nia. Please give a round of applause to Ibu Nia. It is very interesting, ladies and gentlemen, on how the Indonesian government is preparing and also already collaborating with different stakeholders, especially in protecting the biodiversity. Now, I would like to move to Dr. Dan Zarin. Pak Dan, if you would like to take the floor, please. Over to you, Pak Dan.
I should have some slides as well. There we go. Okay. Thank you very much. It's really a privilege to be here. I'm representing the Indonesia program of WCS because our country program leadership couldn't be here in Beleng, and those are hard shoes to fill for those of you who know our team, but I will do my best. My role is to lead a global program within the Wildlife Conservation Society on forests and climate change. What I want to try to do today is give a couple of examples of the kinds of things that we're trying to do with sustainable financing around biodiversity conservation, particularly blended finance, and talk a little bit about our role in supporting making initial contributions to the Indonesia Biodiversity Fund as a critical role for an organization working in the country. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just briefly what I'll try to cover. I want to talk just for a couple of minutes about what this organization is that I'm representing here, a little bit about how we think about blended finance for biodiversity, the role of the private sector, and then what lessons we can draw from these finance mechanisms that we have some experience with. Next, please. So WCS is a somewhat peculiar organization. It's a global conservation organization working in 55 countries that we've organized around 14 regions globally. A pretty clear mission across the board around saving wildlife and wild places. In Indonesia, we've been collaborating with the government of Indonesia for more than 25 years on this mission of conservation of Indonesia's biodiversity. That's about a little more than half of what the organization does. The other half runs, if you've ever been in New York City, it runs the Bronx Zoo and the Central Park Zoo, the New York Aquarium, other things there. So it's kind of like a conglomerate organization. Next slide, please. In our global programs, we are very much field focused, right? And that's what we really do and have been working on for decades. What we've also evolved are a set of kind of cross-cutting programs that work across the whole organization. One of them that I lead is on forests and climate change. We also have a cross-cutting marine program, one that is focused on countering wildlife trafficking, another focused on the intersections between wildlife conservation and health, and one on rights and communities. We also have programs on conservation technology, international policy, on the role of markets, and on protecting the ranges of species. Next slide, please. I won't spend much time on this. One of my colleagues earlier referenced the biodiversity financing gap and the global biodiversity framework's conclusion that there are hundreds of billions of dollars missing if we are going to adequately address the crisis of biodiversity loss that we have. Next slide, please. In approaching the question of blended finance, because we all seem to think that some of this money has to come from the private sector, we've really ought to acknowledge that there are some key challenges here, right? Governments that are representative of their people tend to focus and try to prioritize things that are in the public interest. Private companies do not have the same incentives. They are focusing on activities that are going to serve their private interests and result in profits for their owners or shareholders. That's the economic system that we live with. And so when we're talking about blended finance for biodiversity conservation, we should be clear that the purpose is really about how to leverage private finance, private investment in using public capital. Doing so means that we need to address the private sector's perceived and actual risks in nature-based investment. And some of them are real and some of them are just perceptual. This is a kind of new area of investment for most of the private sector. And doing so includes meeting what are the requirements of these investors in terms of their return on investment or their risk-adjusted return. And often it's quite natural for people like me and who work for conservation organizations to forget that the private sector really needs to invest in opportunities where they will realize a return on their investment. They're not investing in it just because they love biodiversity. They're investing in it because they see a business opportunity, an investable opportunity. And that's a difference. It's a cultural difference that we need to be clear about. A core constraint that we've identified in working in this in a number of places, including Indonesia, but not only, is the importance of identifying and quantifying this adequate return on investment for the private sector. And typically, that is not linked to sort of global goods like keeping the climate, in a manageable space, or like preserving biodiversity. But typically, it's linked to products or ecosystem services that lie within the value chain of a particular corporation. Whether it's water for one example in the world that's prominent is for the Coca-Cola bottling company, whether it's, a net zero deforestation commodity for others. That value chain is critical and why they're going to invest. Next slide, please. Within those constraints, the private sector can have many roles in terms of providing investment, really helping to mainstream sustainable practices within their supply chains. They have obviously key roles as partners for governments, for communities, as well as for civil society organizations. And we know that they're increasingly important in terms of financing and in terms of monitoring and reporting on these risks. Next, please. So a few examples here of blended finance for biodiversity conservation in Indonesia that the Wildlife Conservation Society has been involved in, and I'll spend a little bit of time on each of these. This is just sort of the summary here first. One is something that we've called our Forest First program. It's around how do you actually implement in the field this sort of proliferation of zero deforestation commitments around particular commodities. This is hard work. It has to be done in the ground at the front lines where commodity production meets deforestation. And in Indonesia, that's often in a context that involves rural communities, their livelihoods, and so on. We have an example where we've worked on this on coffee production in southern Sumatra, around the protection of the Bukit Barisan Selatan National Park, in collaboration with national, subnational governments, with many communities, and with numerous purchasing companies. And I'll say another word about that. Another example that's really quite global, and we are involved in Indonesia as well as elsewhere, is something called the Legacy Landscapes Fund, which is focusing on strengthening conservation in kind of some of the world's best areas for protecting biodiversity. It's administered by the German government with additional finance from Norway and France. And the way they make awards, they require a match from some place in the private sector. It can be a philanthropy, it can be a company. In our case, in Indonesia, we're working in Gunung Leuser, in an area that's mostly national park, partly a forest management unit. I'll say a little more about that. A philanthropic foundation provided the matching capital for the German, Norwegian, and French capital administered in Germany. And then the third example, of course, is this novel example of the Indonesia Biodiversity Fund. I'll say more about that. WCS saw it as a priority to support the government of Indonesia in establishing this fund for a variety of reasons. I'll talk a little bit about that. But this is the product of a very long partnership between a conservation NGO that is global in its scope, very focused on implementation, very focused on partnering with governments. And in Indonesia, as I mentioned, that's a 25-year-long relationship. So we have a lot of confidence in our government counterparts in the structuring and building out of this fund, knowing that it is not going to, it is not going to provide a huge number of immediate solutions, but this is a long-term process, and government partnership is critical. Okay, next slide, please. A couple of slides on this Forest First approach. We've employed this in Indonesia as well as elsewhere. We're prioritizing actions that are right at the frontier areas where the embedded risk of deforestation is high, and there's an opportunity to protect the forest ecosystems if we can kind of establish a commitment to do better on the production side, intensify instead of extensify production systems, requires supporting smallholder farmers and local communities. This is hard work. It's a lot of work on the ground. In many instances, those people, those individuals in their communities, they're not necessarily earning even a living wage from the work that they're doing. If we can improve that through intensification, we can reduce the risk of that the forest frontier extending further into the intact forest. And there's a big focus in this initiative on catalyzing collective responsibility, collective action to work with farmers to see themselves not as just part of their own communities, but as part of this broader community that of support and implementation. Next slide, please. So in this context, we think about the landscape as being divided into different zones. And for this particular approach, we focus in that dynamic area of the forest frontier, looking at ways to both address the conservation challenge as well as the economic livelihoods and the rural development challenge, how to do it in a way that supports mutually reinforcing goals. Next slide, please. We picked this area because it is a key frontier in Sumatra, where there is a national park, the boundaries of which are threatened, frankly, by the cultivation of coffee. And there was interest and opportunity to work there, so that's where we've entered into numerous partnerships with supply chain actors, including the set of companies that we've listed there. Next, please. Legacy Landscapes Fund is a very different approach. If you remember the graph that showed you the different parts of the landscape, Legacy Landscapes is focused on that intact left side of that graph, on these landscapes that are some of the best of what's left of nature. You can see all the places on the globe that have legacy landscape sites. 2 of them are Indonesia. We're working in one of them. Next slide, please. It is a absolute partnership with the Indonesian government. We're essentially an implementation agent for the project. It's a 15-year program of work, which is great to be able to have support to actually implement over a really extended period. It is a critical area. It's about $1 million a year, which enables us to do a lot of work on the ground, enables the government to cover a lot of different kinds of work. Next slide, please. And it's all very transparent. It's all very open for anyone to look into, to ask questions about. There are all kinds of processes on there. You can see there's a set of activities about strengthening conservation and a set of real challenges that we're trying to address in this area. 3 years in, it's still early, actually, which is wonderful to be 3 years in and still at an early stage instead of having to report the end of a project cycle. We have 12 years in front of us, and certainly are looking forward to having that stability to work with the government in this really critical area in Loiser. Next, please. Okay, and these experiences of collaboration with the government of Indonesia on these kinds of blended finance mechanisms led us to become an early partner in supporting the Indonesia Biodiversity Fund, which is essentially a blended finance mechanism intended to support conservation of biodiversity and its habitat in Indonesia, established formally earlier this year, really owned by the Ministry of Forestry with the Environment Fund as the fund manager, able to receive funds from a variety of sources and to distribute those funds through a variety of mechanisms to be able to actually implement on effective conservation and biodiversity. I mean, we've seen this as essentially an opportunity to further institutionalize our partnership with the government of Indonesia, further institutionalize the objectives of biodiversity conservation within the government over the long term through this kind of long-term funding mechanism. So we're pleased to be a partner and to have the opportunity to continue this partnership with the government of Indonesia. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the lessons? What have we learned from this experience? I just pull out a few things before wrapping up here. One thing that we've learned is that for blended finance to work, it really does need early investment from either philanthropic financing or from the public sector. If this was something that the private sector could do by themselves, they would do it. And they wouldn't be waiting around, because one of the advantages of the private sector is they can act faster than government, typically. But what they need is to have their confidence in something built up, and to have their investment in some ways de-risked by the investment, typically of public sector capital. What we've noticed not just in Indonesia but elsewhere, is that what private sector investment really tends to preference are mechanisms that have credibility with the government and with leading civil society organizations, that have a clear and compelling return on investment for them, where they can see their way to getting their money back and to making money out of their investment, and where there is low risk, both material risk and reputational risk. The government's participation and commitment is essential, and one thing that is often missing, particularly at the outset of these efforts, is clarity of exactly what is being asked of each partner, who has what responsibilities, who is accountable for what, and that's absolutely critical for success. Next slide, please. Terima kasih. Thank you very much.
Give a round of applause to Pak Den. Thank you, Pak Den. Unfortunately, partner has another engagement and has to leave. Thank you so much, partner, for coming here and becoming one of the panel. And thank you so much for your participation. Please give a round of applause to partner. Thank you, partner. Now I would like to invite also to give the presentations Miss Valerie, Global Director for Climate from the World Bank, to also deliver the keynote speech. Over to you, Ibu. Floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Because I work for a bank, I don't have a presentation, because the PowerPoint would be all spreadsheets, horribly boring after these fantastic presentations you've had showing the incredible biodiversity wealth of Indonesia. Instead, what I wanted to do is spend just a few minutes explaining why the World Bank wants to invest in biodiversity. How much are we investing? And what's our approach to investing? What do we focus on? So as many of you know, the World Bank, we turned 80 years old last year, and we were born to end poverty. Our mission is to create a world without poverty. And in the last 5 or 6 years in particular, when we watched COVID create huge destruction across the world, rich and poor, and it wasn't the only pandemic. We saw Ebola pandemics, other Zika pandemics, other pandemics. When we saw the ravages of climate change and a warming world making the weather worse and worse for communities all over the world, and when we saw that conflict was getting worse, we wondered, what have we done wrong? Why is the world in such a bad place? And one of the things we realized with our analysis was that we hadn't paid enough attention to nature. Because the truth is, when it comes to pandemics, for example, many of them are starting exactly at the arc of deforestation, because all of a sudden livestock are encountering wild animals and diseases are passing between them, and then of course they're passing to us. I don't have to tell anybody in this pavilion why nature is a fundamental part of the fight against climate change. We will never be able to bend the curve of emissions to zero without protecting natural capital. We just can't do it without forests, without our ocean. But it's also true that in order to adapt to climate change, nature is often the only available and only affordable technology. that communities have to adapt to a warming world. And conflict, you may wonder about this one, but we did our research and it turns out that since the end of the Second World War, over half of all conflict in the world was either caused by, made worse by, or funded by natural resources and nature. So even when it comes to conflict, nature is in the middle of the story. And that's why we realized that because our mission is to have a world without poverty, we realize there's never going to be a world without poverty and a world without nature. And so we all of a sudden sat up and realized we need to start investing more. And that's why last year, in our financial year 2024, we actually invested $6.3 billion in nature finance. And that's actually 21% of the Global Biodiversity Framework's Target 19 goal. So it's actually a sizable amount of money. And again, it's because we think it's fundamental to our mission to end poverty and to build a livable planet on which everybody can lead lives full of dignity and purpose. So how do we do it? What do we focus on when we invest this money? So we focus largely on three things, and this is from decades of lessons learned working at the intersection of conservation and development, where we've made a lot of mistakes, including in Indonesia. So the first lesson we've learned and the first focus of our investments is ensuring that we help a country and a community and companies manage their natural assets. Because companies, of course, many of them manage huge tracts of land, particularly agribusiness companies, mining companies. And of course, countries, natural capital is the sovereign right of countries to manage, and it's where communities live. So it means investing in nature governance, in the coordination that Pak Nuradi was talking about a while ago, the importance of coordinating across ministries of finance, forestry, and environment, for example. But it's also about having the right policies and regulation in place that incentivize conservation, that penalize and tax deforestation. So it's all about ecosystem governance, having the right policies in place and building the right institutions, and not just government institutions, but community institutions, indigenous institutions. The men and women, the families who actually manage the land on which they have lived for generations, sometimes for millennia. And not just the land, the sea, the waters. So that's the first thing we focused on. The second thing we focus on is growing and diversifying the sustainable businesses around nature. And this is really, really important. And this is because, honestly, I think as a community, we've made a lot of mistakes. For the 20th century, an awful lot of the economy was built around grow now, clean up later. It led to a lot of deforestation. It led to a lot of dumping in the ocean, for example. When we finally sat up and woke up in 1992 here in Brazil at the Rio Conventions and realized as a world we couldn't go on like this, we really pushed conservation, but we made another mistake. We asked the men and women who live off of the ocean, who live in the forests, to sacrifice their growth in order to save the environment. And that wasn't right either. And that's why for us, it can't be about beekeeping and basket weaving. It's not about throwing a little bit of money towards communities to hope that they stop being engaged in deforestation. It's not about criminalizing what they do every day to survive. It's about figuring out how do we modernize the economies they're part of? How do we grow and diversify businesses that are based on nature? And these businesses are huge. Nature-based tourism is one of the largest sectors in the world. The sustainable forestry sector employs 1% of the entire global workforce. And a quarter of those employees are women. So nature is incredibly important for a source of jobs, a source of healthcare, a source of all sorts of businesses. The bioeconomy is so important, and that's what we want to invest in, so that the men and women who live in nature, who for generations have kept that nature standing, can make money out of it, but do it in a way that protects nature. We're no longer going to ask them to give up their right to put food on the table for their families, to be able to afford to send their kids not just to primary school, but to university. And then finally, our approach is to ensure that those men and women who live in the forests, we're not just talking about the environment with them. We're talking about healthcare, we're talking about education, we're delivering the benefits of modern societies to where they live, and doing it in a way that fits with their traditional knowledge, with their traditional ways of life. And that's important to us, and that's why we're so proud to be able to work in Indonesia. We have a new program we're designing together, the Livable Indonesia Forest Economy Program, LIFE, where we're going to apply these principles and test them. We've been proud to work in Indonesia, who of course are our owners. We're a cooperative bank. Indonesia is our boss, so we do what they tell us. And they're telling us we have to do this. We've worked together since 1968, and we are so proud to take part and build this LIFE program together and make sure that we can deliver for development in Asia, for growth and jobs, but also for nature and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bu Valerie. Thank you so much for all the speakers for the clear and insightful presentations. Now, since we have strong foundations from policy, governance, financing, partnerships, and also global perspective, we would like to move towards a moderated discussions. Now, I will ask each of the panelists directly some questions, and I would like to go to first Pak Rwanda. Pak Rwanda, your slides highlight how FOLU integrates biodiversity across forests. And building on that, how are biodiversity indicators embedded and monitored across different forest types within the FOLU NetSync 2030 operational plan? Pak, over to you.
Thank you, Mas Ari. The challenge is a question from the moderator. Yes, what our target in FOLU, one is the big thing is how we can maintain our forests. So when we success to maintain our forest, it means the biodiversity still can be maintained. So that's why the successful of the FOLU NetSync in Indonesia will support the success of the biodiversity in Indonesia. So that's why from the activity in FOLU NetSync, we supported by also like blended finance come from different sources. So the succeed of the funding for FOLU will be we can say cut and paste for the Indonesia Biodiversity Funds. Yes, you know that Pak Daniel just mentioned that Indonesia from the Ministry of Forestry just launching the iBio funds on June 2025. Yeah, with a collaboration with BCS and World Bank and BPDLH. Yeah, thank you, Mas. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Rwanda. Please give it a round of applause to Pak Rwanda. Now I would like to ask Ibu Nia regarding on several aspects on iBio Fund and financing pathways that is very clear during the presentations. Ibu Nia, if I may, what is BPDLH plan to leverage the iBio Fund to co-financing, blended finance or international partnerships? Ibu Nia?
Yeah, thank you, Mas Ari. Yeah, so our plan is the first one, of course, in Indonesia context, because this is new product. When we talk about the blended finance, one of the product that can be issued is like collective investment undertaking. So this is a kind of new product in Indonesia. So maybe the first thing that we would like to do is how we can make sure that the product can be released. It is important to involve like a financial service authority in Indonesia, because we have to get like a blessing from them, because they have authority for new regulation for new product. This is the first thing. Of course, the second one, we will coordinate with the line ministry, because we have to identify, as I mentioned, the underlying project. What kind of the project then can be offered to the investor? So at this point, it is important because we have to make sure that the underlying project that we will offer have to have like low uncertainty, because when we talk about the biodiversity, it will involve the social aspect and also other aspects. So I think this is quite, we can say, a bit tricky. Yeah, because this have high risk for offering the investor if we don't have any good evaluation of the biodiversity. And then for the next, of course, we have to make sure that the market receive the product later on. This is one of the option of the blended finance that we will to mobilize the private finance later on, Mas Ari. So the existing fund that we have right now coming from the public fund mostly, from the government of the Norway and also other donors in Indonesia. So the existing fund is already, like we can say, to finance or to strengthen the enabling condition for the biodiversity conservation, as like Pak Ruanda mentioned, under the VOLU program in Indonesia. And then as we already a bit confident. We already have like a level of the enabling condition is quite good, and then we can move how we can involve the private sector, so we can use the private fund, catalytic fund later on. Thank you. That's all, Mas Ari.
Thank you, Ibu Nia. And next, I would like to ask to Pak Dan. Pak Dan, your slides actually highlights long-term collaborations across government as well. Community and also partner. Building on that, Pak Dan, does WCS collaborations with the government also involve private sector participation? And which model have proven effective in sustaining biodiversity outcomes, Pak? Over to you.
So I think one of the examples that I provided during my presentation on this Forest First intervention is very much as collaboration from a number of different private sector companies along with the government, both nationally and subnationally. The other areas that we're working in, we see lots of potential, but it's important for us, and I think this is part of what's enabled the longevity of our relationship in Indonesia as a international conservation organization. We operate as a guest of the Indonesian government, right? And so it's incumbent on us to follow the lead. In this case, as I mentioned with the Indonesian Biodiversity Fund, the Indonesia developing this fund was not our idea. It was the idea of the government of Indonesia, which we've chosen to support. This is part of what is part of our characteristic as very much a conservation implementation focused organization. We partner with government and with local communities on delivering conservation action on the ground. There are other organizations that are very much working on pressuring the private sector, pressuring government, etc. They have their place in this landscape, but you can't do everything as an organization, and the role that we play is as an implementation partner, and that means that in terms of working with private companies, we'll work with those under, if it becomes a priority under the terms of our operating agreement with government for the work that we do in the country, which gets updated on a periodic basis. So we're not about to jump in to work with a particular company in Indonesia unless it's a priority that the government asks us to partner on with them.
Okay, thank you, Pak Dan. Please give a round of applause to Pak Abdan. Now I would like to go to Ibu Valerie. Ibu Valerie, you mentioned during your speech that biodiversity finance also links into global finance and also sustainability agenda. With that in mind, how does the World Bank view biodiversity financing within the broader finance and sustainability agenda, especially following COP30 outcomes here in Belém? Over to you, Ibu.
It's an excellent question, and I think it all comes down to private capital mobilization, which is the topic of the day. It's the topic of the COP. It's the topic of every COP. There isn't enough public money The government of Indonesia is a powerful government, and yet you will never have enough money to do everything, nor will the government of Brazil or any government. And so private capital needs to come to the table. And we think it's coming, but sometimes it needs help. And it needs help in a few ways. The first way is something we call de-risking. And that's when we, as a multilateral development bank, we absorb some of the risk of investing in an area that a private company may not well understand, may not get the same size financial returns as if they invested in something else that may be worse for the environment. This has happened a lot, for example, when, and we've heard examples of this afternoon on the panel, when companies have decided to move into deforestation-free value chains. A lot of companies that used to be involved in deforesting in order to grow soy, for example, or deforesting in order to have livestock, they're willing to do it in a way that is nature positive, but they need to learn, and they don't want to have to pay to learn. They want somebody else to pay for those lessons, and that's part of the role of the MDB. So it's about de-risking. But the second thing we really need to do, which is so important to mobilize private capital, is not always talk about risk. Because even when we talk about de-risking, all people hear is risk. We have to talk about being equity investors. And as an MDB, we have a brand and we have a balance sheet that has power in the financial sector. So when a private company or a bank sees that the World Bank is co-investing, they get excited because they know this is a product or a process that is worth doing, that is going to be successful. So those are two of the ways that we use our money, not to substitute for private capital, but to unlock it. The third way, and it's incredibly important, is making sure that local capital markets, local domestic money markets, the places where we all go to get our money, to start a small business, to get a mortgage, that those banks with their local currency provide money for the bioeconomy, provide nature finance. And again, to do that, part of our role is to help train them how to do that, to get them comfortable with new products and new processes. And this is something that the Biodiversity Fund, and more broadly the Environment Fund in Indonesia, has been at the forefront of showing Indonesian investors what else they can do in this sector. And that's again why we're so proud to be able to learn from what Indonesia is doing and to be able to bring some examples from other countries to Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Valerie. Please give a round of applause to all of our panelists. It's very interesting informations and discussions that have been discussed here during our panels. Unfortunately, I was being notified by the committee that we are running out of time. So very unfortunate. Actually, I would like to also ask the audience for opportunity to ask questions, but unfortunately we cannot do that. With that, I would like to conclude our panel today, discussions today. Thank you to all our speakers today that we heard one clear message, that financing biodiversity is financing resilience. Indonesia is demonstrating leadership through FOLU, CBD alignment, iBioFund, multi-stakeholder cooperations, and also innovative global financing mechanism. With that, I would like to conclude our panel discussion. Thank you once again, Bapak and Ibu, for the speakers, for the audience especially, and also for the Indonesian Environment Fund. Now I would like to hand the session back to our Master of Ceremony for the next segment.
Thank you very much for bringing a diverse perspectives that builds synergies. It's very, very amazing to hear all the speakers sharing their insightful perspectives. We really need to strengthen this bioeconomy, like you said, and we do value your contribution, and we cherish our partnerships. So with that, on behalf of Indonesia Environmental Funds, IEF, Mas Aditya will be handing over, Agastya? Okay. We'll be handing over a special merchandise to all the speakers.